Hello and welcome to the Cardiac Cats YouTube channel. I'm your host, Jacob Shorba, and today we're going to be starting our look at the defensive side of the football for the 2024 NFL Draft. We're going to be ranking the top 10 cornerbacks in this group. This is going to include boundary corners, it's going to include slot corners as well. So we're going to have a plethora of these players, and we've got a lot of different kinds of players to talk about as well. Some really exciting ones, even at the bottom of this list. I think you could potentially get impact starters out of some of these players. There's absolutely the potential for that. It's just a matter of choosing the players that fit your scheme and make the most sense. And they also, of course, have to fill a need. I think that has to be said because you look at the defense now. Well, when you entered the offseason, slot cornerback was a clear need, right? Because if you want Antonio Johnson moving a safety, Gregory Jr. is your only slot corner. That doesn't really make a ton of sense for Jacksonville. So they needed to add someone. They signed Darnell Savage, which people originally thought, hey, he's probably a safety. Everything we've heard makes it sound like he's the slot cornerback, and it makes a lot of sense. Like, from everything that was said while he was in Green Bay, they wanted to be able to play him in the slot. They felt like that was where he was going to be best, but they never had the opportunity to play him in the slot consistently because they didn't have safeties. Funny enough, this is also the same team that traded out of 45 with a division opponent to allow them to draft Brian Branch. I don't know why. I also don't know why we weren't the team that traded up, but whole nother story. And so at the end of the day, Savage hasn't got to play a lot in the slot, but when he has, he's been pretty good. He has a skill set to do really well in that kind of role. So we're looking at boundary corners. That's what we're really considering in Jacksonville. But I am still going to consider talking about, of course, slot cornerbacks to make the top 10 of these rankings. And there's some that I really like. There's one that I'm a huge fan of that it kind of hurts that it doesn't really make sense now for him to come to Jacksonville because I felt like he was an incredible fit. He showed out at the Senior Bowl. And so we'll talk about him. It's not the guy in the thumbnail. It's a different guy. But you could probably guess who he is before we get to him, which he is my 8th ranked prospect. But my 10th ranked prospect out of these guys, number 72 overall, Max Melton, out of Rutgers. So talking about Max Melton, he's a younger player, 22 years old. I don't know if he turns that before or after the draft, but sometime very close to then is when he'll turn 22. So he's a younger player. Comes in at 5'11", 187 pounds. It's decent size. It's a little undersized for the outside, I would say. But it's good enough to work with, right? It's not going to kill you. And I think he makes up for a lot of these things. And what he can offer in the speed department. So this is a player who ran a 4.39. That is a great time. A 151, 10-yard split. Has a great RAS score. Has really good combination of hands, arm, and wingspan. So talking about arm length, that is. Compared to other cornerbacks, I think he stands out in every single one of these metrics. And you can see that through everything being shaded green, which is for players who are in the higher percentiles of these prospects mentioned, ranked from lowest measurement to the highest measurement. So Max Melton, he has a lot of those tools that you're looking for, just a little short. It's probably the one knock on him. Now, getting into the film, the first thing that stands out about Max Melton is that this guy is a turnover machine. As of the time that I wrote my original scouting profile on him, he had 8 interceptions during his college career. We're not talking about a 24-year-old player doing this. We're talking about a 22-year-old. So I think that's pretty dang impressive. So he's going to force turnovers. He's a super fast player like we talked about. He has a proficient understanding of zone coverage. That is where he finds most of his success. And he's a willing run supporter. Now, as far as the concerns, like I said, a little undersized to play outside. I'd like him to be a little bit bigger, like him to be a little bit taller. Can't change one of those things. And that's going to definitely be a bit of something that'll hurt for him. But I still think he'll ultimately be able to play outside. He also allows quite a bit of a cushion when he's in coverage. He's also a player who gets fooled pretty easily at times. And so there's major concerns there that keep him from being with the best cornerbacks in this class. And that's why, like, when we talk about the potential, of Max Melton, it's extremely high. Like, he could be one of the best cornerbacks out of this class, and he's probably going to go earlier than where I have him ranked. And it's for fair reason. But it's just a question of, can you get that out of him? Another thing that I have a concern about is that he doesn't consistently tackle well. He has some issues there. I would like to see him improve that facet as well. So I have some concerns. Like, I don't think this is a player who's going to be proficient in man coverage at the start. I don't think he has the physicality to do it, for one. And I don't think he sticks with wide receivers well enough. But he does have the speed to do it. So Melton, ultimately, to me, he'd be a really good player to bring in and have sit on the bench maybe for a year. You don't force into the action right off the bat. But if you do that, if you have him start, if you're putting pressure on him right off the bat, I don't know if that goes too well for him. He is not a player that I trust to start from the beginning of his career. Now, getting into my 9th overall prospect, got Kamari Lassiter out of Georgia. He was originally ranked quite a bit higher than this, but, well, he's still running his 40-yard dash, some would say. And so that's definitely a major concern with him. But this is a younger player. This is a player who comes in with good enough height to play outside, 5'11" and a half. I mean, a lot of this, as far as height and weight, is identical to what Max Melton was. But I do think that Lassiter is a more physical player. He does have smaller hands, which, honestly, for cornerbacks is not a major concern for me. I guess it would impact press coverage a little bit, perhaps, when you're putting your hands on a receiver. But as far as at the catch point, if I could speak properly, with Kamari Lassiter, in every other cornerback in this class, I'm not that concerned if you have small hands, because the amount of times that you're going to need to bring down an interception is far less than like what we talk about with receivers. And that's why we actually care with receivers. What is your hand size? And even then, they can overcome that. So it's a very minor thing. However, Kamari Lassiter also doesn't have the greatest arm length. He doesn't have a great wingspan. And then, of course, like we mentioned, not a fast player. Ran a 4.65 for his 40-yard dash. Definitely not what you wanted to see from him. Now, getting to some of the film, there's some things to like about Lassiter. He's a ferocious tackler, first of all. Kirby Smart, at one point, called Kamari Lassiter the best tackler on their championship defense. This was before they lost this last season. So Lassiter has received very high praise from his coaching. He's got great awareness. I think he's going to be good in zone coverage. In 2023, he was able to shut down most of his opponents. I also think, while he's not the fastest player, his short area burst isn't that bad, and you could kind of notice when we're looking at like 40-yard split compared to 10-yard split, it's not as red in the 10-yard split because it's a little more explosive than what the 40-yard dash would show. But it's still, a pretty major concern for me, obviously, with his overall speed. Another thing that I noticed with him that I really liked, felt like he did really well against screen passes, consistently blowing him up in the backfield, causing negative plays for the offense. Really like that part of his game. I think he's going to be a great run defender at the end of the day and be able to support well in those situations. But, concerns, average height, needs to bulk up a little bit, not very fluid. You got the serious speed concerns. And then as far as experience, he's not the most experienced out of this class. I think he's going to need to play a bit more before he fully figures out the position. But that said, you can argue that's a positive. Maybe if you have him sit on the bench, anything along those lines. And then finally, this is an aggressive player. He can get very physical at the catch point. It could lead to penalties in the NFL. It is not yet at the college level. That could be something that really throws him off early in his career. But ultimately, with Kamari Lassiter, I think some things fit what Jacksonville's looking for. But I don't fully trust him to be everything they want. I don't think he's going to be nearly fast enough to meet the metrics they're going to look for. And I get concerned about how physical that he can play at points, because he is going to draw some penalties at the NFL level. Now, getting into a player that I am a huge fan of, and this is the slot cornerback that I was talking about earlier, it's Jarvis Brownley Jr. He's a second-round prospect for me. He's number 58 overall on my board, 8th overall cornerback. He's about 23 years old, don't have a specific age on him, wasn't able to get his birthday. Still trying to look for it for a lot of these players, but comes in obviously undersized, right? He is strong. He's got good weight, right? 194 pounds, but comes in 5'10 and a half. It's not ideal. He's got good hand size, decent arm length, decent wingspan. As far as his speed, it's not the greatest, but this is the player who's going to play very physical. And while he's not that explosive, I think at the Senior Bowl, he showed that he can still stick in coverage. He showed a lot at the Senior Bowl. I mean, I think at the end of the day, he was the best player out at the venue. And I wish I knew about him before because I would have watched him a bit more. But getting into the film, he's super physical in press coverage, does really well in those scenarios. He's very sticky. He has good fluidity. He has a lot of experience playing inside and outside. And they asked him at the Senior Bowl, like, do you see yourself as a nickel or do you see yourself as an outside corner? Jarvis Brownley Jr. did say the nickel. That's where he sees himself best. Now, could Jacksonville draft him and say, this guy is going to play outside for us if we need him to, and he can be our backup in the slot? Absolutely. I think Brownlee is a good enough player to start, and I think he could be an impact starter if he continues to show the things he did at the Senior Bowl. But I just don't know if where the Jaguars are going to value him, especially considering the investment that they've made at cornerback, especially in the slot where Brownlee's going to be best. You know, I have concerns about how much value they would assign to him because need does factor in a little bit. It's not the major factor, right? But when you can't get on the field, that becomes an issue. And so I think this is a player that Jacksonville, with their situation, doesn't look at until day 3. And it wouldn't shock me if a team took him on day 2 because they watched him, blow up the Senior Bowl. Now, as far as other things, I think he shows some good explosion. I think he has solid recovery speed. The 40-yard dash doesn't really reflect these things, but this is just how I felt on film. His game speed is maybe a bit different. And this is not a player who's afraid to tackle. He will get physical with people. And there's some cornerbacks in this class that, man, you just wish that they cared a little bit more about tackling because you want the complete prospect. And I think Jarvis Brownley Jr. can be that inside the slot. As far as my concerns, like I said earlier, lacks ideal height. And there's also some points in coverage where he has some lapses, lets up some plays that he shouldn't. That's a part of basically everyone's games. But at the end of the day, this is a great prospect. This is a guy who's got a lot to work with. He's a hard worker, not someone you're going to have to worry about off the field as well. I'm a big fan of his. And if Jacksonville had a need in the slot, I would be a huge fan of picking him maybe at, say, pick 96 if he's there. But I think with their situation, they've got to wait until probably the 4th round just because of how long they've basically locked up all these players for. And specifically the slot, because that's where he's going to be his best. So it's kind of my concern with how he fits in Jacksonville, but he's a player I love, player I'm big on. Now, a player that I used to be really big on, used to love, and then the combine happened, was Nate Wiggins. It's probably confusing why I say that, right? Because you think, well, the combine, he was incredible, right? He ran a 4.28 and completely took it by storm. And he's doing that with a terrible 10-yard split, as you can see. Well, here's the thing. Nate Wiggins came in at 173 pounds. That's like Emmanuel Fort size. And so for him to get up to size, to play outside like we want him to, I'm not confident that when he comes into year 1, that's not just fat. That's a lot of muscle to put on. So I have a lot of concerns about him being able to be physical at the next level for that and endure. I think that's asking a lot from him with the size that he has. But a lot of these other metrics, they're pretty good. He's a very young player. He's not even 21. He's going to turn 21 at the start of the season. Comes in at 6'1.5", one of the tallest cornerbacks in this class. He's 173 pounds, like we said. That's obviously a big detriment. Solid hand size, but for everything said about his length, this was supposed to be a major positive. He was supposed to have good arm length, good wingspan. Didn't end up having that. There's a major concern that I have with him. And so I say that's a major concern. It's because originally, like when we scouted him, what we were told was this was a player who had great length in about every way you could imagine. And that's just simply not true at the end of the day. So he took a tumble down my rankings for that reason and many others. Getting into his film, there's a lot of things you can love on his film. I think he shows an immense amount of range on the field, and that's not shocking. Like, this is a player who's not that big. He's, of course, tall, but he just flies. He's great at that. And he was not tested much this season because teams didn't want to throw his direction. They didn't trust their receivers to go up against him. There's a lot to say there. That's a similar thing to what we'll say about Kool-Aid McKinstry later in this video. And I think that itself, it kind of sets a floor for how low a prospect can go. And maybe I'm below that, but just don't love a lot of the things with this. But still, like, there are things that you can like about his prospect profile. I think he's a very fluid athlete. I think he keeps well with receivers through transitions. And obviously, like, not being tested much, he's going to be a lockdown corner. He's going to eliminate players from the game. And for his size, he tries to play physical. And I commend him for that. He has an alpha mentality in the way he plays. But at the end of the day, like, there are major concerns here. He's got to add size. He's got to add strength. That's a long process from 173 pounds. To get up to where he should be, I don't know if he's there by the beginning of the season. And so it makes it difficult for him to come into a team like Jacksonville and be able, for example, contribute against the run. I don't think he's going to be able to do that. He has very little experience moving around to the slot as well. This is not a versatile player. This is a player who's going to play outside only. And there's also some concerns, perhaps, about his character from some poor team interviews. I know from what I heard, he did not do well with Jacksonville. He didn't do well with a few teams. And it's not that shocking. Like, you watch his combine interview, it's not that he's doing anything just atrocious, but just didn't interview well. Like, you can watch it and kind of notice that. It's essentially a job interview out there. Didn't feel like he sold himself that well to teams. And so I've got some concerns, obviously, with Nate Wiggins, and I've got him pretty low. And a lot of people will probably disagree with that, but that's just my opinion on him. I don't see how I would draft him unless he was, just someone who for some weird reason ended up tumbling, because there's going to be teams who are just fine with some of these issues that I have. Now, getting to our next guy, it's TJ Tampa. Tampa is one of the best players when it comes to the physicality and when it comes to the overall size. A lot of these things are just green. He's 22 years old. He's 6'1", 189 pounds. A little bit leaner than we thought, but honestly, I'm okay with that, because for Tampa, like, the question with him was how fluid of an athlete is he? How much can he keep up with receivers? Like, those are the major issues. He has some really good hand size. Some of the bigger ones in this class for the cornerback position, might even be the biggest of all the prospects I've got listed. He has good arm length, good wingspan, but obviously at the end of the day, not a fast player. He had a really bad 10-yard split. This is one of the worst ones we've seen, and it, in fact, matches some of the offensive linemen from this class. But, even with a really bad 10-yard split, you compare this to, like, take my next prospect, for example. I won't say who it is, but the next prospect ran over a 10th faster in the 10-yard split, but there's less than a 10th difference in the 40-yard dash. So I think Tampa could have that long speed perhaps, but I just don't think he's someone who's going to be able to keep up in the short and intermediate areas as well as you would like him to. Now, getting into some of the film on TJ Tampa. This is a tall, strong athlete. He's played multiple sports throughout his life. I think it shows on film. He's a great pass breakup cornerback. He has a lot of broken passes that he forces. He has great ball skills. And for his size, as much as I say he is not a shifty player, I think what puts him high on people's boards is the fact that for what you would expect at his size, he is pretty shifty. It's just that on average, like, you want a little bit more there. I think he also did really well in single coverage without having help. Did great in that regard. Huge in run defense. Great run defender. He comes from a college as well that's really good at developing these kinds of players. So that's definitely something I wanted to note. And he plays with a lot of physicality. I think he has most of the size to do that. You know, obviously he came in a little lighter than expected, which is fine. He probably played a little bit heavier, realistically. Now, for concerns, I think this is a player that needs to improve his angles in pursuit. I think he lacks the explosiveness that you're looking for. And so you put this guy up against a really good route runner, like, for example, say he's going up against Ladd McConkey. I don't think that's a great matchup for him. He's just not going to be able to keep up with those kinds of players. And the way he's got to win is he's got to be super physical. It's going to be hard to do it against those kinds of players. So maybe this is someone you want more so on an X receiver than defending those Z receivers that are great route runners and that have a little bit more speed. But there's still very much a role for TJ Tampa in the NFL. Now, as far as my other concerns, like, it's not a major concern. It really doesn't even have to be a concern at the end of the day. He is solely an outside cornerback. He has not played inside much, if at all. And so I don't really see anything happening there. And as a blitzer, just didn't seem that effective when he was sent down. Which part of that, honestly, is, you know, if you lack speed, if that's part of the concern, you're not going to really be able to get around the edge as well as what some cornerbacks are able to do. So those are my problems with him, but ultimately, this is a good prospect. Like, solid player, be a good pick in the second round for an NFL team. Maybe Jacksonville. I don't know how they see the speed. That might be a concern for them, but I think he'd be a fine player wherever he goes. And quite frankly, with his last name, probably just needs to go to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They've got a need there anyway. Just make it happen. But going to a player I love, Renardo Green. Renardo Green, funny enough, I did not get the hype with him until a few weeks ago. And I finally went back and I rewatched him. And this happens for a lot of prospects around this time of year because they just kind of get stashed down the board. And I didn't watch enough film or understand exactly what I was seeing. I am very new at this process. Like, just to be honest with you guys, this is the second year I've had a big board for the NFL draft. And last year I didn't complete it. So it's a learning process. And like, my initial evaluation with Renardo Green was nowhere close to where it should have been. He was in the hundreds for me. After this, after rewatching him, he's number 36 overall. Like, this is a player I'd love to take in the second round. I have no problem taking him at pick 48. Now, maybe you could trade back. Maybe other teams don't see that same kind of value. That's a game you got to ask yourself if you're willing to play, because there's a lot of risk involved with that. But to talk about why Renardo Green is a good player. He comes in at 6 foot, flat pretty much, 186 pounds, maybe a little smaller, but that's okay. Comes in with good hand size, like solid arm length. Nothing special, but he's meeting what you would want there. He's got solid speed as well. I think he does find that, and a really good RAS score. Now, where he really stands out is when you go on the film, especially if you watch him against LSU. Unfortunately, I don't have that film here, but he shut down Malik Neighbors when he played against him. He went against top-level competition, and he played his ass off, and he succeeded doing it, and that's where he really deserves to stand out in this class, because he has proven it against these players. He is a player that is consistently involved at the catch point. You will see that when you watch his film. He had 13 pass breakups in 2023, and maybe even more. I might even have to update that number because some of these notes are from before the season ended. But the point is, even if it's at 13, that's insane. Like, he's breaking up a pass every single game. He had elite man coverage grades as well per PFF in 2023. He's got good overall speed, and I think he's solid at recovery. He's got good instincts in coverage, lots of starting experience. He is an older prospect at 23 years old, halfway to 24, and he's solid in run defense. This is a very physical corner. This is someone who's going to be a perfect fit to play press coverage at the next level. He just makes too much sense for Jacksonville, and this should be the player that they target on day 2, realistically, given where everyone else should probably go. Even if he's 5th overall, I think the top 4 are gone maybe day 1, and one of them probably early day 2, who we'll talk about in a moment. But with Renardo Green, concerns with him, he could bulk up a little bit. He's got some early contact on plays. He's very physical. And so that could be a problem. Wasn't really penalized a ton in college, though. So it's the question, once again, how does this translate to the pros? He didn't have production in the turnover department, despite all the pass breakups, which is kind of weird. But as you know, sometimes that switch just kind of flips. Look at Darius Williams, for example. 2022, he had a lot of pass breakups. Didn't have an interception all year. Then 2023, early in the season, he's tied for the lead in the NFL for interceptions. And it's just sometimes what happens. So he's always close to the ball. This problem can go away. And as far as zone coverage, he's kind of an unknown. He played press pretty much all the time at FSU. So generally that would be a concern. But for Jacksonville, is that a problem for us? Absolutely not, because we want the experience in press coverage. So all these things, they may push him down the board for a narrow team. But for the Jaguars and for teams that are looking for press coverage cornerbacks, Renardo Green is a fantastic fit on day 2. It would not be shocking if Green was one of these guys who gets picked a little deeper in the draft that ends up being a plus starter at the NFL level. And in fact, on the NFL website, for their scouting profiles, they project him to be a plus starter at the NFL level. So I think teams might take him a little bit earlier, even in spite of me saying that maybe the lack of zone coverage skills pushes them down the board. But this is a good player. And if he's available at 48, unless you have a lot of prospects that you like and you're okay trading back and just getting one of them, it could get risky to make a move like this, because this player, by the time it's April 25th, April 26th, April 27th, all the days of the draft, he might be going a lot earlier than we think. Now, getting into our top 4, there's a bit of a gap after this player, but he's a player I love. And it's Rakestraw Jr. One of the best mentalities you could ask out of for a cornerback. There's one other player I think that comes really close and pretty much matches them, maybe in a different way. That's Terrion Arnold. I love the way both these players approach the game. I think Ennis is a player that just wants to be challenged, and he wants to conquer that challenge. I love that about him. He is a younger prospect still. He'll turn 22 after the draft. Comes in at 5'11.5", 183 pounds. He does have pretty small hands, but like we said, this is a minor thing. This is not something that I'm super focused on. He does have good arm length, though. Comes in with 32-inch arms and about a 75-inch wingspan, which is fine. And as far as how fast he ran, this is probably what kind of takes him down a tier from the top guys, because the top guys separate in some other ways. And for Rakestraw to stay with them, I think he has to be more athletic. And he's just simply not. He ran a 4.51. It's not the end of the world, but it's not as good as it could be, right? So that's a bit of a concern, but not something that's going to necessarily kill him at the next level. Just kind of puts him in that next tier. Now, getting into my notes on him. So Rakestraw, I think he's got really good speed when he comes downhill. He has a great downhill trigger, and he plays super physical when he's in press coverage. He has some experience in that kind of role. He's shown the ability to contest the catch point very effectively. He's a sticky player in man coverage. And for teams that need potentially a slot, well, he's probably an outside cornerback at the next level. He has the ability to start in the slot. So these are all things I love about him. And then obviously I already talked about the mentality as one of the best in the class. The way he approaches the game is something that you're absolutely looking for in players and someone you're going to be happy to have on your team. Now, as far as concerns, like he's 183 pounds. It's a little small. Want to see him add a little bit more to his frame because if he's going to play physical, he could get injured playing at that size. His zone coverage skills still being developed. Now, once again, for Jacksonville, we're not that concerned about it. So that's okay. But in general, that is a detriment. And then as far as being a one-on-one tackler, I saw him struggle a little bit on film. Don't think he's great in those situations. So if you're, possibly going to give up 20 yards if he doesn't make the tackle, you're probably a little concerned. And then the final thing, he has had some injury issues. It's kind of a consistent thing where each year he misses a couple games. And so that's not great, but at the end of the day, he's playing most of the time. And so hopefully, like at the NFL level, this isn't as much of an issue. But Rakestraw, he was a late riser, wasn't someone who was anywhere near this kind of range until he got noticed. And once he got noticed, I think it's justified. I don't think he's a first-round pick unless he goes to Kansas City. That would make a lot of sense, at least. But to your team, probably a little early, but still, this makes sense as a player that could get drafted maybe early day 2, come into the NFL, and just be a really good pro. And you're not really concerned about all those issues because he's doing his job on the field consistently for your NFL team. So I like Rakestraw. Definitely one of my favorite corners in the class. Now getting into the top 3, and it's really, your pick of what kind of player you want. I think every single one of these guys can play press, so that is a great thing, but it's really your choice. As much as they have a little bit of separation, and maybe where the rankings are from the third guy to the first and second, the grades are almost identical. Kool-Aid McKinstry is the lower of the 3, and I would not be shocked if at the NFL level, he ends up being the best of the 3. And I could say that for literally all 3 of them. And if you're wanting a deal on draft day, this might be the one that you go get. Because Quinyon and Terrion, you're probably moving up for them if you want to make sure you get them. McKinstry, I think he's the third one taken. And there's a little bit of a gap where maybe corner's not going. Maybe you're looking at Philadelphia as a team that takes it. But you could move back and secure him. That is an option. But Kool-Aid McKinstry, he's a younger player, 21, halfway to 22. Comes in at 5'11" and a half. He's one of the bigger prospects with size as far as weight, which is something I like. And he runs super fast with it. He's 199 pounds. Once again, actually very similar measurements to Ennis Rakestraw Jr., identical in hands and arm length, but not major concerns with the hands, and he's got good arm length, right? So you're fine with that. He ran pretty well in the 40-yard dash. He ran better, actually, than all the 4 top players except Quinyon, who kind of blew everyone out of the water. But the thing that stands out with Kool-Aid is that 10-yard split. This might be the best one among the cornerbacks. And so it shows that he has this explosion. And so when receivers are getting into breaks and when they're changing direction, Kool-Aid's going to be able to stick with them. And he's got the press coverage skills. This is a player who has done tons of press coverage at Alabama. So absolutely gotta love what he can be at the next level in that kind of scheme. So this is a guy, talking about my notes on him, he's got a very athletic build. He's a great press coverage corner already, very sticky in that type of coverage. And last year, I think the big difference between him and Terrion Arnold, and we'll talk about this on our questions we're going to have fans on and have them talk about NFL Draft Day, what they want to see the Jaguars do. I already talked about it a little bit on that. You'll hear a little more dialogue on it. But the difference between McKinstry and Terrion Arnold is that McKinstry was proven before this last year. Terrion Arnold was nowhere near this range. And Arnold ended up getting challenged this last year because people respected McKinstry and they didn't respect Arnold yet. And so McKinstry doesn't really get the opportunity to go out and stand out because he's not getting targeted, which is a good thing. But it's almost being taken as a bad thing because no one really saw him do a ton this year. And then Terrion Arnold is over here with tons of turnovers and great stats because they're throwing his way and he's dominating them. So it's kind of two flip sides of a coin. And I like both the prospects because you got to take that into consideration. Like McKinstry has proven, Arnold proved himself this year. They're both great players. And so I think it shows something very good about each of them. Now, other positives with Kool-Aid McKinstry, he competes at the catch point, very good in that regard, and he has that short area burst that keeps him close to the catch point. So you love that combination. He contributes on run defense as well, something I love about him. Now, as far as negatives, like kind of in regard to that run defense, it feels like sometimes when he tackles, he abstains from delivering big hits that he could give. I saw this a couple times watching him. And so I wish that he just kind of brought up an air level. And maybe he does in the pros. Like some of these things just do magically go away. And maybe it's just something that, I happen to watch the games where that showed and that's not who he is. But I would like to see that improve. And sometimes when he's in zone coverage, which, once again, not going to be as much of a problem here, he can allow a little bit too much separation. So I don't like him as a zone corner. I think he's got to be in a press man scheme, which is a perfect fit. He's also kind of confined to being an outside cornerback. He hasn't played in the slot much at all, so if you're drafting him, you're keeping him on the boundary. That's the kind of game he's going to play. And the final thing, doesn't have a ton of interception production, but once again, like if you're not getting the ball thrown your way, what are you supposed to do? So McKinstry, he might be a value on draft day because teams just didn't get to see him do a whole lot this year. They saw him, trying to keep up with receivers, and that's kind of it. They didn't see him at the catch point a ton. He was not thrown towards nearly as much as Arnold was. So it might provide a value there, but don't get it wrong. McKinstry is right there with these top two players we're going to talk about. They're all very close to each other. I think it's just kind of your preference. But something I changed my opinion on over the last week or so, because I was a huge Terrion Arnold fan. I still am. It's not changed one bit. I ended up putting him as my CB2. He's been my CB1 for quite a while. But at the end of the day, when we talk about Quinyon, like what stands out about what Quinyon did is it felt like every single opportunity that he had during the offseason to prove that he could do something that people didn't think he could do, every single time he blew him out of the water. He did it at the Senior Bowl. He did it at the Combine. People didn't think he was a super fast player. Goes out and runs a 4.33. So that's why he's above Arnold. We'll talk about him more, of course, but just want to give that reason real quick. And we'll get into it more here in a second. But talking about the subject at hand. Terrion Arnold is a fantastic prospect. And I think this is one of those players that it's just so hard to actually draft him and miss on him. I don't think that's going to happen. I think whatever team gets him is going to be thrilled to have him. And he might have a very similar career to, say, Jalen Johnson. He has very similar measurements, too. Very similar kind of player. But Arnold, he's young. He just turned 21. Comes in basically at 6 foot, about 190 pounds. He's got, solid measurements. They're not terrible at all. They're average to maybe a little above average. The question, and what separated him, I think, from Quinyon, is the long speed. Because he did run a 4.5. And so, like, we've brought up our prospects, of course, that are close to this. Haven't mentioned that as much of an issue. But with Terrion, for him to be CB1, I think he just had to be better in these regards. And so, doesn't hit that mark, but still, like, this is a phenomenal player that doesn't have major flaws in his game right now, even for having broken out pretty recently. I think he's going to be great in the NFL. Getting into my notes on him, he does have solid length. He has good overall speed. It's just a question of that long speed, because it's just not as good as some of the other players in this class. I think he does a fantastic job in run defense, one of the best tacklers I've seen He's ferocious when he gets to ball carriers. Just a really good player in run defense. He has a lot of fluidity as well. One of the best athletes in this class. And I think some of what sold me originally on him was watching him do some of his drills. Like, it's great film. Like, just go watch it on his Twitter. I think he's uploaded some of them. Like, this guy works hard and he is very athletic. He has a lot of great tools to work with in that regard. He also has pretty good awareness. I think he's solid in zone coverage. Not the greatest, right? But solid, which is better than some of these air press cornerbacks. He has good ball skills, breaks up a lot of passes, and when he gets his interceptions, he has return ability. He's also been a turnover machine. Like, that's a great combination. You get more shots at it, you might get a touchdown there. And last year, or actually this might be over his whole career, he's had 5 interceptions, a forced fumble, and 2 defensive touchdowns. He's got explosive short area quickness, which is where he makes up a little bit on Quinyon Mitchell. And once again, like talking about tackling, he has great form. He's played inside and outside. He was originally recruited as a safety for Alabama, so he has knowledge all over the defense in the secondary. And while we said zone coverage is okay, it is constantly improving. This is the player who's getting better and better by the day. And I don't think that's going to change coming into the NFL. Now, concerns, there's times where I think he could be a little more tight in his coverage. I think he could allow a little less separation. He also doesn't have that great recovery speed. If he allows that separation, he's got to gas it up to get to them. It's not always enough. And then there's some times where he can be a little slow to recognize routes. And once again, that's kind of going along with zone coverage. So not a ton of detriments, but there's just a little bit there that I think puts the littlest bit of separation between him and Quinyon Mitchell, who ends up being just one spot above him at 10th overall. He might be the best of all the prospects that I don't have as S tier. And the only reason why I don't have him as S tier is because technically, like, we didn't get to see him do a whole lot at Toledo. I've tried not to weight it too much on that because every opportunity he's had to prove that he's the guy, he's done it. And so maybe he deserves to be in that tier. Maybe he is by draft day. That might change. But it's just the fact that, like, some of these things he's going to be asked to do in the NFL, he does not have a lot of experience in them, even if he's good. You know, kind of a similar argument as what you'll hear for, like, Jackson Powers Johnson. Different player, of course, different position. But JPJ, like, he's got a ton of talent, but doesn't have the experience. He has not started a whole lot in the NFL, in college football, and really only had 1 year at center. So kind of the same thing for Quinyon in some regard, just as far as like what he's going to be asked to do in the NFL. Not really something he did a ton of, unless you're going into his zone scheme. But getting into the metrics, he's a little older of a prospect. He'll turn 23 right before the start of the season. That's okay though. Comes in at 6 foot, 195 pounds, solid size, big hands. Arm length could be a little better, but not the end of the world. What really did it for me as far as putting Quinyon at number 1 overall of all my cornerbacks was the 40-yard dash, which is just insane. And just to put this in the context, Nate Wiggins going into the combine was ranked identical with Terrion, and he was a little bit above Quinyon for me. That's where they were. You had Nate Wiggins run a 4.28, and he weighed 22 pounds less. And Quinyon was within, what, like half a tenth? So this is a fast player who has the size too. He's the whole package. It's not just he's average in both these things. He's very good in both of these things. Now, getting into the film, I should have just put up the 4 interception game or 5 interception game he had. It would have been fun, but I thought Ohio State would have been a fun one to have instead. The reason why I heard about Quinyon originally was because he had a game in college where he had like 4 interceptions in the game. It was crazy. And so that stood out about him and got him on people's radar. And I'm very happy for it, because if it didn't, well, you know, it could be a very different story. And this could be one of those players that goes much later and ends up just being incredible for his position, but he doesn't get paid what he's worth. He should be paid like an early selection. But he had a whopping 5 interceptions, 13 pass breakups in 2022. Fantastic build. Got great burst, great short area quickness. He does excel in man coverage when he's in that situation, and he does have the instincts to play zone coverage. Now, when he was at Toledo, what they were asking him to do the most was play off man coverage, so you could see on film, he's just constantly lined up really far away. So they didn't give him the chance to play a lot of press. But when he went to the Senior Bowl, dude was a badass in press coverage. He was one of the best out there. Just every time you were watching Quinyon Mitchell, except for the one rep against Roman Wilson, right? The only negative part of his entire offseason, he was phenomenal. He's got really good ball skills as well. Obviously, that's going to be true. He forced a ton of interceptions. He's got good height, good size, like everything you want out of him, he has, except some of the experience. So the concerns, like, it's going to be some very obvious stuff here, right? He didn't play against top talent in college all the time. Like, this Ohio State game was not his every week matchup. Not that you play Ohio State every week, but they're not playing the normal teams that these other competitors do. So Quinyon Mitchell maybe had a little easier than some, but he's went out of his way to challenge himself. I cannot overstate that enough. Now, their concern, he did give up some pretty big plays in college at times. I did see that on film, so that is a bit of a concern. So you want to see him maybe tone down the aggression a little bit. And then as far as press coverage, I obviously said he did pretty well in it, but this is a player who doesn't have a ton of experience playing press coverage. So there's questions about, is that going to be consistent? So overall, like, these concerns, is there a single one of them that a couple years from now does not possibly have a chance of going away? No. Like, we could be 2 years from now and Quinyon Mitchell could be a damn near perfect NFL player. And that's why he's got to be first for me, because he has that kind of potential. I think with Terrion, like, you do have that limitation that he does not have the elite speed. And that's what separates these two players, because otherwise Terrion would probably be above him, because he is also a younger player, has generally less experience playing the position, and I think he could have had a higher ceiling. But Quinyon, I have just above him. I think whoever you pick, whether it's him or Arnold before, or even McKinstry, like, you're getting a great player. That's the really nice thing about these guys. And as much as, like, Mitchell is ahead of the other two, the other two, I think, make up for a lot of that in terms of where they played, the coach they played for, and the players they played against, because they were constantly challenged by the best of the best. So you got to appreciate that about them. But hey, this has been a fun one. You got some great cornerbacks in this class at the end of the day. Some very exciting players. And there's some I didn't get to talk about. It kind of sucks to not be able to mention them. That could be really good too. Like, I'll mention a few quick so you guys at least know they're on my radar. 11 was Cam Hart. This guy, like, you want to talk about him quick? He's got phenomenal size. He's not supposed to be super fast, but he tested out better than expected. And when he played the best of the best, he ended up showing up. Like, he had 2 good games against Marvin Harrison Jr. You can't name many players who can say that. But as far as, like, concerns, you know, I wonder how this transitions to the NFL. I think, he's also obviously an older prospect coming in at 23, halfway to 24. Doesn't have the ideal recovery speed. He's just kind of limited in that regard. But ultimately, like, if you want to take Hart above some of these players, like maybe even above, you could get up to almost Brownley, I'd say, like, that's fine. He's a really good player. He's got a very similar ranking, and he's got the same grade as Max Melton. It's a very close race. I think as well, like, Mikey Sanger, still great slot corner. Another really good one. He is an older prospect, but going to be great in zone coverage and show some great instincts on the field. Kyrie Jackson is a very interesting evaluation, because if it wasn't for the fact that he's for some reason going to be 25 when the season starts, there's not a lot of things to dislike about him. Like, the only thing that I would probably have against him, He doesn't have elite top speed. And then maybe he could put on a little bit of weight, which he's 194, but he's 6'4". He's a huge player. And funny enough, like when he played Rome Odunze in the Pac-12 championship, he showed up, buddy. Like he played really good football and they moved Rome away from him at a point in that game. So maybe he deserves to be deep up this list, but it's like 1 year out of the blue, basically, is what we saw. So I don't know how to feel. Like I've never evaluated a prospect like that in my life, and I might be way off, but I want to at least say, like, Kyrie Jackson, if you got him, damn near like in the second round, I don't blame you. Like there's absolutely reason for that. I just don't really understand how this guy figured this out after turning 24. And I think he was like playing for JUCO before that. So very confusing one, but not a lot of limitations. But it's kind of the guys that stand out to me after the top 10 that I wanted to mention. There's some other ones I could talk about, but these are the big ones. It's a very solid cornerback class. I want to say very good, but I don't think I can say that without having like the perfect prospect at the top. And Quinyon comes close, but it's just the fact that the experience playing in an NFL scheme is not there. Yet somehow, despite that, he makes the top 10 because he just did that damn good of a job this offseason. So it's been a fun one, guys. I've enjoyed talking about the cornerbacks. We're going to get into defensive line. We got 2 more rankings videos before the draft. I'm going to try really hard to have them out within the next week. I want to have it done by the time draft week rolls around so we can focus on some other stuff. But, it's exciting. There's some good defensive pieces, and as much as the Jaguars loaded up on the defensive line, you might want to pay attention to the rankings there too, because we don't have a lot of depth at this point. Like Trevis Gibson is the top outside pass rusher behind Josh Allen and Trayvon Walker. You got Devon Hamilton, who's kind of still a question mark coming off injury, and Tyler Lacey is the top guy back there. And then you got Roy Robertson Harris as well, but I don't think he's been that great. Like since his contract extension, he didn't really have the year I wanted him to have. So I think at the end of the day, like it would be very likely the Jaguars would consider someone, maybe even in the first round, because that defensive line rotates, especially the interior. Like there's nothing wrong with going out and taking a Johnny Newton or a Byron Murphy. Ideally a Johnny Newton, which, spoiler alert, might tell you who my top guy is, but we'll leave the rest for that video. So thank you all for being here. I appreciate you joining the channel, supporting it. It's been a blast. I've enjoyed these last few months, getting to do a lot of fun stuff here, getting to go out to the Senior Bowl. It's been phenomenal. But let me know what you think. Let me know what your rankings are. Maybe why you disagree, maybe why you agree. But we'll see about it all, and we'll know here in a couple weeks what's going to happen. So thank you all. Have a great rest of your day. And finally, go Jags.